How I bootstrapped a startup, got an interview at Y Combinator, and then sold the company. I recently did a video where I talked about what I would do if I started again as a founder. In this video, I'm going to bring you the receipts and talk about how I actually did it and a lot of things that I've learned along the way. I interviewed down at Y Combinator in 2015, back in the day when they were doing live interviews. So they flew us down. I got to spend some time in Silicon Valley. It was a good time, and I learned a lot. There's just something magical about being down there in Palo Alto and Mountain View, hanging out with all these other founders and just being surrounded by that Silicon Valley startup vibe. Things are much different now. You can go to all different types of cities that have got their own mini versions of Silicon Valley, but it was definitely a special time for me. And I recommend every founder try to apply to Y Combinator at least once, because whether you get in or not, it is a learning experience. Before we continue, my name is Ed Kang, 7-time funded founder with 2 exits. That's just a fancy way of saying I failed a bunch of times to your benefit, because I like to use videos like this and my entire channel to try and help founders, especially early stage founders, raising pre-seed and seed funding, avoid some of the catastrophic mistakes that I've made. Not to say that you're not going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try and minimize the damage, the pain, the heartache, because it's tough enough as it is. I'm also the Chief Strategy Officer for Startups.com. If you're joining us from Startups.com, our online accelerator community, thank you very much. I appreciate all your support. While you're here, you might as well leave a like, comment, and a subscribe. It's always helpful. And if you stick to the end of this video, I'm going to show you what to do if you didn't get a Y Combinator interview. I want to start by saying that this is my story only. There's so many other ways to get into Y Combinator. I know founders from Startups.com who've gotten into Y Combinator, and it's different every single time, just by a little bit. But I think if you look at the playbook that I use, maybe you'll get some ideas. This might help you out. The other thing I need to mention is that I am non-technical. I don't have any coding skills, no background in that. I started my journey to Y Combinator as a non-technical solo founder, but then brought on a technical founder who became my CTO, one of the best co-founders I've ever had later on, and this is him now, Nick, joining me at the interview down at Y Combinator. My startup is called MDNA Cloud. It was acquired in 2017. I interviewed down at Y Combinator 2015, and then at the beginning of 2017, I finalized the acquisition. And you can see it on the screen right now. It was a SaaS platform that measured intrinsic motivations of employees and then visualized the culture, made all these recommendations. HR departments, managers, everybody used it to understand culture, how to manage it. And it was really great because at that time, we had just begun the wave of learning from Zappos and Google that culture actually mattered. The problem was managers, C-suite, especially the ones writing the checks, were not going to pay for the soft stuff like culture. So this program allowed me to address that pain point of a lot of the instances that we were dealing with when it came to trying to work with organizations. MDNA Cloud is definitely well-traveled. It's been used in multiple countries. It was used in China, translated in Chinese. It's been a great portfolio piece for my career. Now let's get into the steps of how I got to Y Combinator and then eventually sold the company. The first step was my obsession. I began getting obsessed because of a personal itch that I had to scratch. And that was all about intrinsic motivation. And I dove headfirst into the science of intrinsic motivation, specifically something called self-determination theory. What I did is I read all the books that I could get my hands on, and I began talking to a lot of experts. And that was just the beginning phases of my entry into the domain of what would eventually become my startup. Then for step 2, I identified that there was a problem in my very own workplace. I began looking around saying, hey, wait a second. If this is so great and intrinsic motivation works well for motivating employees, then why isn't it working in my own companies? I was running a family office at the time. I was the executive director. I was buying companies, setting up companies, moving companies into buildings, and I was experiencing a lot of pain trying to motivate employees, get them productive, especially as I started up the HR department. I learned a lot about human capital management. So there were these gaps, these pains that I knew I wanted to solve. So then I began diving and exploring online communities, user communities, and I wrapped my arms around the problem. I tried to learn as much as I possibly could, and I got to the point where I did validate that this was a big enough problem that I said, hey, let me try this whole startup thing. And I think that's why MDNA Cloud was successful, because I really started with a problem. I had no software in mind. I just became obsessed with the problem. I began exploring the problem, realized I had it myself, and I set out to solve that problem for me. And then I validated that other people would have this problem. This was bigger than just me. So the market was getting bigger and bigger the more that I researched. Then I got to the MVP stage, and this was multiple MVPs. MVPs. It wasn't just one. And I didn't start coding software either. That was not my MVP. My first MVP was manual. It was written on sheets of paper. That was version 1.0 of my MVP. I would take these sheets of paper, I'd have people fill out a few things, I'd calculate the results, and I'd sit across from them and say, I think this is you. I think this is your intrinsic motivation. What do you think? And I would watch intently their reaction. And I did this with dozens of people. I sat them down in my boardroom, and all I did was have them answer a few questions, and then I slid a piece of paper over them. That was my MVP. Then I got a lot more complicated, and those sheets of paper graduated to an Excel spreadsheet. And I didn't even do the Excel spreadsheet. I had my buddy who is known for Excel. I said, can you program an Excel spreadsheet that does this, this, and this? And thankfully, he really liked my stuff, and he did one for me, and I began using that. So instead of showing up at an event or with a group of people and having them fill out manually the assessment on a clipboard, try my MVP manually, and I'd have to calculate all the results. I got really good at doing math in my head. I now had an Excel spreadsheet that made things go a little faster. We could do it online, just sent the Excel spreadsheet, they filled it out, and poof, the results would happen. And then after that, inevitably, people would ask, what's next? And so I developed a workshop and I started consulting. That was my MVP version 2.0, if you will. And this is a lesson. Your MVP does not have to be the light version of your program. It doesn't even have to be software. It's just anything that you can do to validate that you have founder problem fit, founder market fit, and you're getting to problem solution fit. I could take care of all of that manually with spreadsheets, workshops, and consulting. I didn't have to have any software at the time, which allowed me to get to step 4, which was making money. If people were willing to pay for it, organizations would pay for it, well, then I knew that it was enough that I was solving their problems. Had I perfected the product yet and completely solved problems? Absolutely not. But at least it was compelling enough. I had a compelling enough unique value proposition where they would pay me because they said, this is a problem that we want to have solved. We think you can solve it. Here's some money. And eventually I managed to confirm problem solution fit, especially in the way that I got referrals from other people saying, hey, you need to talk to so-and-so. Or I would get a phone call and someone would say to me, I was talking to so-and-so and you helped them out. Can you come and do the same for me? The secret of this whole phase was founder-led sales. I became the #1 salesperson. Yes, I was developing the product, but I was selling like crazy. Nobody's going to take ownership and sell like you can. Nobody's going to get in front of the customer and talk to them and gather all the data unless you are the founder and you are doing the sales. And that's why every founder has to start with founder-led sales. It falls into the Y Combinator's do things that don't scale. Well, founder-led sales definitely do not scale, but it gets you up close and personal with the data, which creates a feedback loop that allows you to do continual development and improvement. Iterative improvements will start to happen, and that's going to save you money and save you time. All the while, I was doing this while I maintained my day job. I did not quit my day job just yet. There's always a time for you to jump into it, and I'll explain it in just a moment, but I managed to keep my day job because I wanted to stack up that runway. Remember, startups don't run out of money. Founders run out of money. And I made sure that I did not run out of money. So you can imagine I was really busy. I had young children at the time, but it was the commitment that I had to make to try and make everything work. And I was obsessed with solving the problem, going all the way back to my obsession, which allowed me all the energy that I needed to maintain 2 jobs, build a startup, maintain a family, take care of myself along the way. Then it came time to build the software MVP, which would eventually become my SaaS platform. What I did is I talked to all my clients and I talked to people using the software and I said, what are the problems that I'm not addressing yet? And one of the pieces of feedback they gave me was that, Ed, we need to be able to measure this culture work, this intrinsic motivation stuff somehow. You're not making it easy on us by selling all these workshops and consulting, and it's hard for us to actually show the results for the company. So I began talking to them, asked them questions. I said, if it looked like this, what would measurements look like? And that's where the first mock-up started to occur. It was like literally asking my customers, what do you want to see in the software? And they told me, and I started to plan on how to build it. The next question I asked was, if I could do this, how much would you be willing to pay? This was all about after idea validation, customer discovery. It's about price discovery. And I remember one of the first conversations I had, someone told me we would pay $3,000. I said, done, I'm going to do it. But here's the funny thing. I did it all manually at first using Adobe software, some really late nights. I didn't tell the founders the software did not exist. It was a whole fake it till you make it scenario. I said, done, I'll get the software, I'll do it for you. When literally I was up till wee hours in the morning, moving around bubbles and dots and lines, just like I showed you as the graphic user interface just a moment ago, I was doing that by hand. And then once I did it a few times, I went into actual development. By then, I had made from client work about $200,000. I had enough for a pre-seed round. I was my own investor, my own money, my own revenue was the best investor that I could get. I did take an angel investor a small check, a 5-figure check along the way because she really believed in what I was doing, but I was pretty much bootstrapped all the way through. And that's the best part. When you bootstrap with client revenue, it feels really good. You're not pressured and you have a lot of confidence. What you're building can be used because most likely it'll just slip in and start to replace all the manual processes that you've been doing up to that point in time, make you more productive, increase the profitability and revenue opportunities. But one of the secret tips that I always give to founders, if you're non-technical, is hire a project manager, and a project manager that is independent of the dev shop. And that's what I did. I had a buddy of mine, and he was there from inception, and he was a project manager for construction. But I told him, I need you to project manage this dev shop because a lot of weird things can occur from the dynamic between the founder and the dev shop, especially the salesperson or the project manager they assign you from the side of the dev shop. They can say a lot of things. Sometimes there's gaslighting. They pull the wool over your eyes. You don't know what you're talking about. They take advantage of that. And sometimes everybody's just operating in good faith. But other times I know dev shops that are very opportunistic and predatory. So my project manager acted as bad cop and I was the good cop. Meanwhile, I just kept working my day job and I continued to sell. While this development was going on, my project manager was doing his thing. I kept working away, especially focusing on sales. Then it came time for the launch. And through my sales effort, I got the ability to launch our software and demo it for the CIO Association of Canada. This was a room full of hundreds of people, and I got to use the software to manage the entire conference, and I did a demo on measuring culture with everybody. It was such a nerve-wracking time because this conference lasted a couple days, and I ended up having the entire tech team sit in the back, hacking away. When things would start to break, they were there to monitor to make sure this launch went smoothly. But boy, was I nervous. In the end, it worked out fantastic. So many people came up to me, asked me about my software. Investors came, asked me if I needed some funding. Clients showed up. It was fantastic. And I wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't just stuck to sales. It took literally a year to get that opportunity and to close it down. I also met what would be my number one client on social media. Remember, I was continuing to engage with online user communities, and I began developing a reputation to talk about a specific topic, and I ended up getting a recommendation and a referral introduced on Facebook to my number one client, and I ended up doing a lot of free demos. I was handing out free demos left, right, and center. And then I developed relationships with people who would also offer free demos to their clients. And it just expanded. It kept going in these ripples, these concentric circles. I began reaching more and more people. But then it was time to get super serious about the startup. It was the traction phase. And that's where I plan to apply to YC. I've been watching YC. I was taking their online Stanford How to Start a Startup class. That's free on YouTube, by the way. And it was so educational. I said, I'm going to try to apply to YC. I think I got a good shot based on what I've learned. And that's when I quit my job to focus on traction. I was making enough money and I said, I need to go all in on this. And I quit my job and I said, I'm going to grow revenues by 10% per week. I also had the luxury of hiring a CTO as a freelancer first. I just put out an ad, I explained my story, I ended up getting a programmer who had been working for some really big projects, but he came on and he started working hourly for me. And the more time we spent with each other, the more passionate we got about working together, working on the problem. And he really carried his part. The intensity of execution was really high. He was the type of co-founder that would go out and we would talk at a coffee shop and then he would go to bed, wake up in the morning and send me like a message saying, I think we need to change this, this, and this. So I know he owned the problem and I was happy to share half of my startup with him. And that's what I recommend. Get a technical person's attention first, treat them right by paying them, and then eventually they'll fall in love with you and you'll fall in love with them if they're the right fit, and then you can become co-founders. We didn't start the conversation about becoming co-founders right away. We worked on mini projects. I took the code base from the dev shop. I said, thank you very much. I was really sick of working with the dev shop at that time. I gave it to him. He began hacking away at it and began making incremental improvements as I began to pay him, and that was enough that I needed to see to say, I think you'd make a great co-founder. Now let's get to the Y Combinator part. I applied, I worked on my application over and over again, refined it, and then I got an email from Sam Altman. Yeah, OpenAI CEO himself. Back in the day, he was president of Y Combinator. He emailed me and he said, can you please send me your growth graph? I pulled all the information I could from growth with real numbers. This was revenue that I was making Sent it to him, and then right after I got the invitation, we want to invite you down to have an interview. I get down to Y Combinator, and it was the most nerve-wracking 20-minute interview of my life, and the feedback they gave me is, we do not like your customer acquisition model. I was using channel partners at the time, strategic alliances, where they were using hand-to-hand combat sales. It was all about individual sales efforts, people-led sales. And that's when Kevin Hale, who was part of my interview, gave me the advice that changed my life. He said, Ed, people-led sales, people do not scale. If you can figure out how to automate customer acquisition and customer onboarding, he said, you're in. That's when my CTO, co-founder, and I went to work, and we started trying to reach product market fit. We automated customer onboarding, figured out, all right, how do customers come onto this themselves without me having to spend time with them or a salesperson and go through all this manual thing to try and sell everybody in the organization. What we ended up doing was figuring out a way to go B to C to B. In other words, I wanted to reach the employees first, and I had the employees take my MD&A cloud, my software, into their organization. And I started a social media campaign targeting employees. Even though it was managers or the HR department that would be the ultimate decision maker, I needed an introduction. So I've reached an employee, and I got this idea from Dropbox and Slack, where they said, hey, employee, use it and talk about it at work. So it's taking the side door. That's what I did. And lo and behold, after we re-engineered the platform and I did this social media campaign, we were getting 2 to 3 leads per day. And a lot of them were very surprising. I would talk to users and potential clients from places that I never imagined that I would eventually be able to reach. It was all happening organically. And that's when we knew we're on the way to product market fit, because it was scaling pretty rapidly. Which brings me to the next step. That's how the exit started. Remember I mentioned my number one client? Well, I decided not to reply to YC or Techstars. I'd applied to Techstars as well, and they sent me this email. The message was pretty much, hey, what's going on? What's the update? We'd love for you to come. Techstars sent me this message saying, your application was very promising, and we'd like to follow up on it. And I didn't respond because I was getting burnt out. And many people said, Ed, you're absolutely crazy to turn something like that down. But that's when I got the acquisition offer from my number one client. They said, instead of going to an accelerator, how about we just accelerate you? We'll purchase you. We'll invest a bunch of money. We'll grow this thing together, and it's going to be fantastic. And to be totally transparent, it was a big relief because I was pretty much feeling it. I was not used to the founder life, that intensity that was required. I was all in on the YC thing, and the gas just ran out of the tank. And so I sold the company with an earnout, which ended up becoming a very long earnout, much longer than I expected. But that was part of the lesson. Every time I experience pain like that, I try and say, this is a costly lesson that I've learned. And the more it cost me, the more pain it caused me, the bigger the lesson, the faster I'm going to learn. So finally, I get to reflection. And what have I learned as I look back on that? Well, part of me regrets selling. I shouldn't have sold. Maybe I sold a little too early. The other part of me is completely relieved because it's not my identity anymore. One thing I learned going through that was that my identity, who I was as an individual, was way too wrapped up in my startup, getting to YC, getting to Silicon Valley, being known as a startup CEO, wanting to be in TechCrunch. It kind of became a different obsession than what started off as the problem that I wanted to solve. I don't really think it was healthy. But what's really nice about how it panned out was that I continued to make revenue and income even after 15 years. And it comes from all different sources. Part of it still comes from the company, MD&A Cloud itself, and other parts of it come because of my reputation and the other opportunities that have opened up because I started a startup and I was able to exit. And in the end, I've learned that I am an okay founder, but in reality, I'm a better advisor than a CEO of my own startup. And so here we are today. You get to be the beneficiary of all my lessons, and I hope you're able to copy my playbook and make it suit you so that you can get to Y Combinator or achieve the success that you know you're capable of with your startup. Now, if you did apply to Y Combinator and you didn't get accepted, you didn't get an interview, what should you do? Well, watch this video next. And before or while you're watching this one, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Let's have a discussion about this. I hope this has been helpful. I will see you in the next video.